Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches to deliver great results and growth in your agribusiness through better execution. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Welcome, Pacesetters of Agribusiness, to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod, where we amplify voices from across the agricultural industry, aggregate those perspectives, and elevate our collective thinking around strategy execution. I'm your host, Joe Mosier, and I appreciate you joining us today. A secular trend in U.S. agriculture is one of farm consolidation across all segments, which means that with each crop cycle and season, the same acres might still be in production, but they're represented by fewer producers, fewer customers that are actually managing that productive capacity. What is also a stubborn trend in agribusiness is the challenge of maintaining growth, if not just basic profitability, for many of the reasons that we talk about on this show every single week. And the third and final trend or piece of this puzzle is what I've observed to be a persistent preoccupation among many agribusinesses with calling on new growers, with trying to capture new acres, with trying to dominate and own new channels, which are all to the detriment of the focus available to serve and delight, retain, and grow with your existing book of business. Now, this is not an indictment of agribusiness overall, but I would say that too many operators have an incomplete view on what their true share of acre erosion is over time, or what their customer churn rates truly are. It might be a function of poor measurement programs. It might be a false picture of loyalty among your growers and your customers and what drives it. More than likely, it's probably both. And so this idea that it's always cheaper to delight and grow with an existing customer than to try to get a new customer is something I think is worthy of time and attention. And so today it's a pleasure to share a conversation I had with Stephen Valenscin of Growers, a technology company founded 15 years ago that helps ag retailers and cooperatives stop customer churn and increase farmer spend with loyalty programs that drive results. In our conversation, we're going to talk about a lot of things, but primarily we're going to talk about the underlying growth of the loyalty space, kind of agnostic of agriculture. Talk about the outsized opportunity available to agribusiness to harness loyalty as a lever for growth in the face of those shifting farmer demographics that I mentioned earlier. We'll talk about what's required to deploy cutting-edge technology in your agribusiness, and we'll even spend a little bit of time talking about why some of the recent government actions that allege anti-competitive practices among several of the major chemical manufacturers, all the lawsuits and the attention and the scrutiny that's warranting, why that should maybe amplify your interest in loyalty as part of your strategy, rather than giving you any sort of reason to run from it. I appreciate you, as always, joining the show today. And if you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe to the podcast. It's the best way to support the show. Let us know how we're doing. It doesn't cost you a thing. And of course, as always, please consider leaving us a review if you haven't done so already. Thanks for joining today. And with that, here's my conversation with Stephen Valenscin of Growers. Stephen, good to see you today, and welcome to the Pacesetter Pod.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jeff. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Stephen, I'm excited for this conversation because while we're going to have a chance to highlight a pretty interesting offer available to the market and what you all do at Growers, and also how you got there, which I think is an interesting story, it's also a chance for us to explore a different avenue than we typically have done on this program, and actually talking about loyalty. Mm-hmm. So we often look at loyalty in the work that we do as, if you have a solid value proposition, if you have market credibility, if you demonstrate the ability to execute, loyalty will follow. And I think that's all true, but it's an incomplete picture of what it's all about, and frankly, how you build a business around loyalty. And so, everyone knows how hard it is to create a product or service that's going to meet a need that growers are willing to pay for. The work that's required to position that product properly in terms of the value proposition, the competitive positioning against what the market alternatives might be, and then all the effort you need to exert to actually win that new business and customers. And sometimes the emphasis on the wide end of the funnel and getting new customers overshadows the importance of retaining your existing book, which is kind of what loyalty is. And so, some might call it customer service or customer success, but I think ultimately it's loyalty. And so maybe talk to us about how you see loyalty, why it's so important, and then ultimately kind of the road that led you down this path to ultimately build a business that's really focused around structuring and ultimately monetizing that for your customers?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because I think that the most exciting thing for me and why we're so interested in it here as growers is that like loyalty is kind of something that the word gets thrown around a lot in agriculture, as like farmers are very loyal and it's all about relationships. And that's sort of been just like the underlying kind of mantra of agriculture since, the beginning of time. And I also think it's a unique kind of point in history, if you will, where loyalty programs as a construct are not a foreign concept. In 2025, I think 92% of retail and consumer brands have some form or fashion of a loyalty or rewards program. And what all these, industries are realizing is a couple things. Is one, it is a heck of a lot cheaper to retain a customer than it is to go out and try to acquire a new one. And two, everybody is trying to differentiate their customer experience because most of the time, at some point in time, products and services become commodities. And it makes it a heck of a lot more competitive and harder for organizations to differentiate. And so the one thing that is always can be a differentiator is your customer experience, and loyalty is kind of at the core of that. On top of that, I think agriculture is like the most appropriate industry for customer loyalty because let's face it, there are, fewer farmers today than there was yesterday. And with a consolidating market, it's not that agriculture in general is decreasing, but the people involved in it are going down. And so what that means is that just mathematically, the farmers that remain are inherently more valuable to all of the other industries that they work with, whether that be equipment dealers or co-ops, retailers, anybody that, built a business around generating revenue from a farmer. It means those farmers are more valuable and they're going to continue to get more valuable, which means that I think it's going to become continuously more important to invest in building those relationships and retaining them. And then the last thing I'll say is because, in our offering here at Growers and a lot of the work that we do to help retailers and co-ops set up and design their own customizable loyalty programs, we look at a lot of data, just copious amounts of, transaction and farmer buying behavior data. And one of the things that we find is that, I think there's a greater perception of loyalty than there really is. I think I have conversations all day long and people love to talk about how loyal they think their customers are. But when you look at the data, what we find is that about 42%, that's the average, right? This is on a spectrum, but on average, retailers and co-ops have about 42% of the acre share or wallet share of their customer base. And of course, there's a lot higher amounts and a lot lower amounts. But if you just want to talk averages, they're currently capturing about 42% of the business from their customers. Also, what does that mean? Well, it means that if you wanted to grow your business, there's an opportunity to more than double it just from investing in the existing customer relationships that you have. And so that is a huge opportunity and primarily the one that we're helping our retail and co-op partners walk through is how do we get more acre share and wallet share of our customers and grow our business from the relationships that we've already invested an inordinate amount of funds and resources to try to acquire? How do we keep them loyal, keep them coming back, and ultimately increase the acre share and wallet share?
Yeah, a couple of things I want to kind of just revisit and highlight there. Your statement around it's a lot cheaper to keep a customer than to get a customer. So in outside, I mean, even in agribusiness, but certainly outside of agribusiness, people talk about CAC or your customer acquisition cost, right? What does it cost in terms of marketing, advertising, outreach, et cetera, to actually book a new customer? And if you take that number and you took it back and say, okay, now what does it take for us to take an existing customer, make them a repeat customer, a returning customer? It almost always pencils out that there's a pretty meaningful spread there, such that dollar for dollar, you're probably better off. Certainly, you're going to still spend money on acquiring new customers, of course, but that spread is worthy of your attention. And then when you layer that, as you said, on a market that is, demographically shrinking, there'll be fewer farmers today than there are tomorrow. There's farm consolidation, demographic turnover, et cetera. The imputed value of those retained customers just amplifies, which widens the spread, which over time probably makes, many markets, many industries are looking at growth of customer base and people you can serve. We're actually looking at a growing market but declining participants.
Yeah, exactly. That's the imbalance in agriculture, that like why this is, so critical, is that if you just looked at it from those macro at a macro level, you'd say this isn't a good market to be in. And that's not exactly the truth, because again, like you said, agriculture is expanding, but it's the customers that are decreasing. So in my mind, there are fewer things more important moving forward for all organizations that are involved in agriculture, involved in serving customers, to figure out how to double down on retaining the ones that you have, and that's where your business growth is going to come from. But you have to be very creative in an environment like we're in 2026. You have to be very creative on how you do that, because growth is hard to come by. And that's what we're focused on, is like, how do we create this compelling reason why, right? A farmer should ultimately change their behavior, consolidate their purchases, and do more business when they're likely perfectly happy doing things the way they are today, right? Which creates even more tension and more conflict and more challenges. So it's complex in some ways, but very simple in another, right? You have to create a better customer experience and prove that the value that you're creating for your customers is greater than what they could get elsewhere. And it's I don't know, it's a compelling mission, and one that we're super excited about.
And it should be more generous and well-intentioned than simply creating high switching costs. Right. So trying to switch your cable provider, very easy to set up a new relationship, terribly, infamously difficult to sever or changing banks or whatever it might be. So if I'm a executive at an ag retailer or a GM at a co-op, what might be some of the most, based on the data you looked at, and these things that are driving people's willingness to look at a market alternative if one was available, right? So this you talked about this misperception of our customers are more loyal than we believe they're more loyal than they actually are.
Yeah.
Are there specific things that you've identified as being blind spots that folks are taking for granted? And I'm thinking, for example, and I don't have the data on this, you probably do, but there's been a perception for many years that co-ops have a structural advantage because of patronage and distributions.
Yeah.
And I've heard anecdotally next gen farmer surveys where they frankly don't look at patronage as part of the value proposition who they choose to do business with. There's other things. And so that could be one where you say, well, we pay patronage. The commercial grain elevator down the street can't pay patronage. We therefore are going to have more loyal customers. And that may or may not be true. But so maybe that example, are there other sort of like big ahas where folks might be misconstruing the level of loyalty they actually enjoy?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up patronage, because that's an interesting one that I think we should unpack, just because it is so prevalent in the industry, and coincidentally with all of our customers as well. But to kind of go through a couple of your questions there, the couple of the biggest blind spots that we see when we're looking at the data, and oftentimes I articulate them as like, what are the two biggest drivers of a loyalty program success, right? Where are you going to see the value created, on the balance sheet? And ultimately, it comes down to retaining customers and cross-segment purchasing when we're talking specifically about a retailer co-op environment. And so the antithesis of customer retention, right, is customer churn. And that's been a major blind spot, not by any ignorance or anybody's desire not to track it. It's just that it's so difficult to track because of how fluid some of these relationships are in agriculture. And just to like share some broad, high-level statistics with you, is that on average, again, averages, we've seen worse, we've seen better, but retailers are churning about 7.2% of their customers every single year. And 70, I think it's maybe 70 or 72% of those customers never come back. So we do see, people leave a business and go somewhere else for 2 years and they come back. But oftentimes, 72% of the time, once they churn, they never come back. And that means they went and they're working with a competitor, right? This is why agriculture is so unique, and why loyalty, I think, is so important, is that they're going to take that business elsewhere, and that business is going to go to your competitors. And so if you like extrapolated that across the industry, it's like a $5.6 billion a year problem. It's just customer churn. And why it's so difficult to track is because, a little bit back to your switching costs example that you used there, is that in some cases, there's very low switching costs for a farmer, right? If I treat you like just a supplier of my crop protection products, and one day I can buy my stuff from you, and we're just having a transactional relationship. Tomorrow I could go buy it from somebody else. They probably have the exact same products, because a lot of those, generally have been commoditized in the way. And so what costs are there for a farmer to go, one day work with you and one day work with somebody else? And that's hard to track, because if you're looking at it in aggregate, which is easier, right? How many units or dollars is a given farmer spending with me in 1 year? And maybe it's flat, but it's flat because they decreased their chemical purchases. The fertilizer prices have been inflated. And so they purchase no new units, but have a flat year over year, total sales generated. And so it's like, boom, that's missed. So that's when we talk about it, we get pretty in the weeds on churn. And I could talk about this all day long, but there's really kind of two types of churn, right? There's relative churn and absolute churn. And relative churn is what's killing ag retail and co-op. And it's that farmers are churning a segment, right? They're going to stop purchasing your energy products and go somewhere else, or they're going to decrease the seed purchase, from you, and maybe go start working with an independent dealer down the way. That's just hard to track. And honestly, I don't fault anybody for it at all, because it was hard for us to track. And it was, in fact, one of the things that we invested on early on is developing what still today is the industry's first AI churn prediction model, where we can actually look at the historical purchasing patterns of farmers as individuals and then start to detect when their behaviors may be an indication that they're, taking business elsewhere, or their relationships are being frayed. And so giving an early indication to that is one of the things that we want to help, our retail customers counteract. Because if you think about it, right, if you're churning 7.2% of your business, and a lot of these organizations are growing by, low single digits per year, you're basically on a treadmill, right? You grew by 5% overall, but what that actually means is you had to grow by 12 or 13% to just replace the customers that are leaking out of the back door. So you want to talk about the fastest way to get 5%, growth in 2026? It's focus on reducing your customer churn by half and see what kind of impact, that would have. So I was, probably a lot more detail than you wanted on a blind spot, but customer churn is a good one.
Can I ask before? So I think that's an interesting analogy of you're on a treadmill, but frankly, if you're not managing your churn, you're moving further and further back on that treadmill with every sort of stride. And that first step where you miss the back of the treadmill is going to be pretty catastrophic, right? It's pretty bad. And so one of the things I was going to ask you about, maybe you kind of address this in the relative churn, is when you talk about the 7.2% like lost customer that you've lost 1 year over the next.
Yep.
My assumption would be that that's not, you have wholly defended the volume with that customer every year up until the moment you lost them. There's probably been significant erosion over time. So even if your annual churn is well below the 7%, if you're an organization that's been able to measure it and you say, well, man, we're outperforming, we're actually at 3%.
Exactly.
But if you look at the aggregate amount of eroded volume and value moved through those customers, the imputed value is probably much higher than 7.2% of your customers. And as you said, once they go, they're gone.
Yep.
That's really interesting. So sorry to cut you off. Please proceed.
No. That's, that's a great point. But like you said, it's why we went, through the pain and the exercise of developing a model that could predict it and detect it, is that we found out, it was like looking through the data, is like, very rarely, granted, there's relationship breakdowns and operational breakdowns and frayed, things that happen where farmers just pick up one day and disappear. But oftentimes they give signals. And a lot of time those signals start to kind of creep into the data, many, many months, sometimes years in advance. But it's just so, again, going back to my point, it's nearly impossible to track that with just, kind of human intervention. And again, this is kind of where I think the advent of AI is proving a lot of value. Is that it can pick up those patterns and recognize those signals and send those alerts, and that's a huge thing to get ahead of. And then the other thing I was going to say from a blind spot standpoint that you asked about is we look at segment purchasing patterns, because the holy grail specifically for co-ops, which is about almost 90% of our customer base is all cooperatives. We do have independent retail, but co-ops are unique because they have so many more business divisions. They've got energy, grain, agronomy, services, feed. And the goal is like, to the extent you're able to, is to try to get, a single customer to purchase all of those segments from you. I want to buy my agronomy, my energy products, get all my services, and I want to sell you my grain. But when you look at going back, hate to sound like a beating a dead horse here, but when you look at the data, it shows that the bulk of customers are really only participating or purchasing in one or two segments. In fact, the graph looks pretty remarkable. The more segments that customers are purchasing, usually it's a smaller count of customers, and so we're designing programs to help kind of change that trajectory and actually get better cross-segment purchasing. And so those are like the two drivers. So if you think about, if you were evaluating, is a loyalty program going to add any value to my business? I'd say, well, if you grew your business by 7.5% with your existing customers, what would that look like? And if 35% of your customers purchase one more category next year from you, what would that look like? Because like statistically, that's what we're seeing is about every year, 35% of our retail's customers are actually expanding their cross-category or cross-segment purchasing, which is a huge growth driver. And then the last thing, just to round out all the questions you asked, is about patronage. And I'm glad you brought that up because most of our customers are co-ops. And in fact, they're all still paying patronage because everybody's doing it, right? It's become a thing that many, many years ago when, it was created, the notion and the philosophy behind it is absolutely the right one. We want to reward our member owners for doing business with us, and we're going to pay out these dividends. And that is going to be the incentive for bringing your business back to a specific co-op. But over time, when everybody started to do it, and patronage isn't guaranteed, right? I mean, some organizations with much stronger balance sheets do have a kind of a nearly guaranteed patronage payment. But either way, I think that's kind of a moot point, whether or not they pay it out or not. The thing that I think is challenging with patronage today is like, is it actually driving the behavior change that you want? That was what it was created for, is to drive behavior change, to create an incentive for you to do business with us versus somebody else. But, and you kind of alluded to it with the younger generation. What we're hearing from the GMs and the CEOs of these co-ops is there is a declining belief that patronage is driving the same type of results that it did in the past. And a lot of it has to come with the visibility and transparency that we all expect now in our daily lives. Right? I'm sure you travel a little bit. And if you're a member of a hotel program or an airlines program, think about how effective that program would be if you had no idea, never, where you were at, how much value you'd earned, and if you were ever going to get any benefit from it. It wouldn't be effective at all. But how they counteract that is providing visibility. They say, hey, Joe, this is where you're at. This is how many points you've earned, and this is what you need to do in order to keep earning and get better benefits. And so what we're able to do as a technology company is bring visibility into the rewards and the progress and the benefit of farmers doing exactly what these co-ops want, which is staying loyal and consolidating their purchases. And that visibility component is critical. And that's one of the big things that patronage, unfortunately, just can't, structurally you can't do that because it's an end of year determination made based on the results of the business. So you put all of that together, a lot of these organizations are continuing to do patronage because it might be pretty dramatic if they, pulled the plug on that. And I'm not, I'm not here to predict where I think that's going to go in the future. I can say though that co-ops are looking at different ways to differentiate and provide more value to their customers beyond patronage.
And I think that's wise because there's a lock-in effect when you've established a relationship with a supplier, whether it's a hotel group, it's an airline, it's an ag retailer, whatever it is. And then you've got the app, you've got the points, you've got the inertia. There is an element where it's sort of incentivizing you to continue to transact with them. But at the end of the day, if they're not performing, so if I have a bunch of IHG or International Hotel Group, which is like the Holiday Inn and Intercon and all that, if I got a bunch of points, but I can never redeem them, the loyalty program's failing. But even more importantly, if every time I use one of their facilities, it's not clean, it's not safe, the reservation gets screwed up, etc. Ultimately, I will start to shop for another supplier. And so I think underlying the patronage thing is also patronage will reward members for transacting with you throughout the year.
Yep.
You still have to also make sure that it's a positive relationship when they transact with you.
1,000%.
Patronage does not fix lousy service, limited product availability, uncompetitive basis offerings, whatever that might be. So we're not going to talk about necessarily executing the business today, but I think it's, loyalty is a big piece of it. and these incentives and these structures and these programs and the visibility, but it doesn't excuse you from actually providing a positive customer service in the meantime.
Yeah, 1,000%. I mean, it is just a piece, right? And I think that's the opportunity today is that if you surveyed 100 retail executives on what differentiates their, business compared to their competitors, I'd bet good money that most of them are going to talk about the services that they provide to farmers, the relationships that they have with them, and the value added, agronomic advice that they can provide as part of a product sale. Problem with that is that like those are table stakes now, right? You've got to have good price, a good product, and a good brand. And if you don't have any of those, right, you're going to be obsolete, I think, very, very soon. So it's a very important, I think, what you said, that like it is just a piece of the strategy. But if you're thinking about how do we differentiate, how do we keep moving forward, how do we grow, despite all of the challenges that we talked about, already in this market, it's like you need to have more levers to pull, more arrows in the quiver, so to speak, to get after these customers and prove that there is value for doing business with you versus somebody else. Because I say this with all the respect in the world, but ag retail is a mud fight. It is a mud fight out there for the hearts and minds of farmers, and it's a very competitive space. And I think it's one worth fighting for.
So I want to make sure that we also have a chance to talk about the blocking and tackling required to actually be able to stand up a successful loyalty program that's going to drive these kinds of results. I think that's going to be parallel to a lot of other sort of technology deployment challenges that independent ag retailers and the co-ops are facing. But before we do that, I mean, we've nibbled at the edges here and talked a bit about the AI, churn prediction models that you've built. But so what is it that Growers has built? What is the offer? Kind of walk us through the product and service, because then I think it'll help us then sort of envision what would it look like to stand up this kind of solution in an organization, and what are the challenges and prerequisites for someone to do that effectively.
Yeah. Yep. Perfect. Yeah. Happy to do it. So what we have built is the technology that enables retailers and co-ops to launch their own custom branded and fully customizable loyalty program that's aligned with their strategic objectives. So all of the investment that we've made here at Growers is building a structure that is connected to the transactional data that we get from ERPs, that does all of the painful and monotonous calculations on what tiers farmers have earned, what categories they're purchasing, how many dollars they've spent, what they haven't spent, redeemed, returned, exchanged. We refer to it internally as our points engine. And that's really the brain that calculates and tracks and administers all of these different loyalty program ledgers, or what we call wallets. And we do that for retail, distribution, and manufacturing, because we serve, basically every corner of the market when it relates to the businesses that sell crop inputs to farmers. And our programs look a little bit differently, of course, for manufacturers as they do for a distributor, as they do for a co-op. But the retail and co-op is our core customer base, and the technology that they implement is really unique because it doesn't carry any growers, brand identity. We are big believers that we're trying to, prop up and support the brand image and the reputation of our customers. And we want to deliver a product that they can be very proud of. And so when you canvas the landscape and you see all these co-ops that have launched loyalty programs in the past few years, they all look a little different because they've been, branded their own, and they've, come up with creative names. It's our technology that's powering it behind the scenes. Same for some of the manufacturer programs that exist out there. And one of the things that is very challenging, I can tell you this from building technology for agriculture for the last 15 years, is that this is generally a demographic that if they had their choice to use tech or not, they choose not, which means that you have to be very, very thoughtful in how you build technology and how you get it implemented, because in 2026, there are no more, co-ops out there that haven't gone through 1 or 5 absolutely horrendous technology integration projects. And so there's a lot of skepticism in the market, and rightfully so, of adopting new technology and integrating new solutions. And I think, a little bit of like how Growers got to be where we are today is, we started on the farmer services side of things, of all things. When I started Growers in 2010, we were providing services to farmers. And then that business scaled, and we ended up partnering with retailer to help them provide services. And that's how we got kind of exposed to the challenges and struggle that the retail environment has. And we started building technology for them, and things have kind of morphed over time. But one of the things that I kind of credit the roots of myself and the team here at Growers is we have this like very practical, boots on the ground, common sense knowledge of like how to get technology in the hands of farmers. And while we're not selling technology to farmers today, it's important for our co-op partners and retailers to know how to do that. And so simplicity in the entire process is core to what we're doing. We don't want this to be a challenging product to implement, a challenging technology to integrate or train. And we've done some things that are very, countercultural, if you will, where to be a part of a loyalty program powered by growers, you need to have a smartphone and a heartbeat and be doing business with a co-op or a retailer that has a program. And that has substantially increased the adoption and utilization of the technology, where you don't need to remember usernames and passwords, and things are authenticated, differently and more securely. And when you don't need to download, an app from the App Store or the Google Play Store, these things they're little things, and they sound, again, countercultural, but they're huge components to how we get the adoption and the engagement that we want. Is like, it has to be low friction, and it's got to be low friction for everybody, the farmer, as well as our customer, which is the retailer. And we're it hasn't come without a lot of challenges, and we're still dealing with a lot of those challenges. But one of the things we try to pride ourselves on is we want this to be the easiest to onboard and implement technology in agriculture, where somebody could call today and say, "Hey, Steven, this sounds like a great idea. It's aligned with our strategic objectives. We want to, differentiate our business." And for very low level of effort, we can have loyalty programs implemented at a huge scale, and sometimes, less than 15 days, which is really unheard of when you think about system integrations inside the ag retail environment, and just how complicated those can be because of how many different things they have to touch. So a lot of our engineering and development effort has gone into how do we make this as simple as humanly possible.
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
Which is going to segue nice into my next set of questions, which is why do you have to make it as simple as possible, and talk about some of the technological and implementation challenges that your customers typically experience, right? So even if you've solved for it, I think we still do a service to the industry if we highlight some of the things that could get in their way. But before I do that, a question occurred to me, and this is maybe going back a bit, so forgive me, Stephen, but if a big part of the value of loyalty is driving the cross-segment sales, so a co-op ensuring that the folks that are buying their protection products are also marketing their grain to the co-op, or also looking at the co-op as their propane and energy supplier, and so we'll be able to like monitor that, drive that kind of cross-segment purchasing. Is the value proposition for sort of a structured loyalty program lower when you have a less diversified or single line operation? So a seed company that just sells, maybe they sell conventional seed and they sell non-GMO. They sell forages and they sell turf, whatever it might be. Or a business that just does custom blend feeds. Do you see less upside opportunity for those profile businesses from a loyalty standpoint, or if they don't have that cross-segment opportunity? Or is there still an element of lock-in where you'll actually drive more volume through fewer channels, through fewer segments within that business?
Yeah, it's a very, very smart question, because, just if you looked at the makeup of our business, it is, dominated mostly by these, larger cooperatives and independent retail that have multiple different segments. And so there is a lot of different ways they can leverage this, but really what that affords them is just more creativity in varying different strategies, right? Because when we're having these discussions, the thing I love to say is that a loyalty program is a reverse engineer, is you're reverse engineering your commercial strategy, right? What are we trying to accomplish? And then how do we build that into a loyalty program where it goes to work for you? So when you have, a lot more options, you can be a lot more creative with your strategy. That being said, to directly address like your question on like the independent seed dealers or a seed only dealer or somebody who's maybe just doing seed and forages, what we typically find is that even in those businesses, especially today, just because it's harder and harder to survive as a business when you're like only doing one thing. 15 years ago, there used to be a ton of literally just like Asgard DeKalb seed only dealers, and that's it. They only sold, one brand, and that was it. Today, you don't find as much of that anymore. It still exists, right? But you don't find it much as more because those seed dealers have had to diversify because they needed to differentiate, right? They needed to differentiate against everybody else. So they started adding in agronomy services, or they started adding in seed treatment, or they started adding in biologicals. So what we typically find, because we do have some customers that are what I'd call a single segment loyalty program, but single segment doesn't mean that you're only selling one thing, because oftentimes when we're strategizing on how to design those programs, we're thinking through how do we sell a broader portfolio, or how do we bundle the product plus the services to create more of this moat around the experience that you're delivering, to your customers. And then the last thing I'll say about those specific individuals, and why I might argue that there's a greater opportunity in some regards for them, is that it's even more differentiated for those smaller companies to think, I will say, outside the box on creative solutions that they can use to differentiate and really punch above their weight class, because that's what they have to do. There's bigger, meaner, faster, stronger competitors all around them. And so there's just those smaller organizations, maybe those single segment kind of, organizations that need to be differentiated, have a unique opportunity to kind of lean into this type of approach, because so many of their peers are not. So I would expect to see, if as our business continues to grow and things shift, that we're picking up a lot more of those type of organizations. In fact, we've got a dozen or so that are launching this spring up in Canada that are very, very small kind of single segment agronomy organizations.
Interesting. Not what I expected to hear, so that's actually pretty encouraging that you're saying it's almost, the loyalty value drivers are still there, but the differentiation,
that's it. Bingo.
In a response to the lack of diversification, actually is how you might stand apart.
Can I give you one funny anecdote that might prove this point? Gosh, I forget what airport. It might have been Charlotte. I was in the Charlotte airport and had to prepay or like pre-reserve a spot to get a parking spot there. And we're talking about a parking deck now, right?
Yeah.
And I filled out the form, paid for my parking spot. And then, whatever, when I came back, I get an email from the parking deck about their rewards program. Okay. So in 2026, we've got parking lots that are literally developing rewards programs to create some compelling reason why I should go back to that, organization. And, it's interesting because I'm fascinated by loyalty programs. I, investigated, well, what in the world is the objective here? And they're trying to change my behavior. They're trying to get me to be, I'm being rewarded for booking earlier, booking often, communicating ahead of time, because that's helping the parking deck solve some of their operational challenges. Do they have availability? What floors need to be closed? How do we manage the bus schedule? They're doing it because they want the data on how I'm utilizing their facilities, and they want to provide an incentive to get me to do more of what they want. So it's like, even in a parking deck, you're starting to see that there is a benefit of creating an incentive to change customer behavior and ultimately capturing the information on how their customers are behaving with their product or service. So I thought that was funny that even parking decks are creating loyalty programs.
Well, certainly, and also a competitive response to rideshare.
Yeah.
That has increasingly probably provided an alternative for folks who live in Charlotte, who aren't commuting for an hour or two away to fly out of the airport.
Yeah.
No other way to get there. So I talked about this before, but so I've been part of organizations, I've supported organizations that are going through but very, small targeted boutique technology implementations, as well as very large scale ERP or enterprise resource planning tool sort of implementations. And for folks that maybe are less familiar with ERP, things like Oracle, NetSuite is one, SAP. So these are some of the big sort of global headline ones, but there's a variety of other industry-specific and segment-specific types of plans. And they tie together your operational, your accounting and finance, your commercial, and maybe even regulatory and other sort of components together into sort of a single system that's going to collect and manage your data. They're painful, right?
Yes.
And they're painful because it requires you to look at the process and the way that you work. They're painful because they're not cheap. They're incredibly disruptive because everybody has to learn new screens, new buttons, new workflows. So there's a lot of reasons that they're challenging in and unto themselves, even for disciplined, process-oriented companies, right? We also know that there's a lot of the smaller organizations, small to lower middle market organizations in our industry that are not process-oriented, speaking candidly, right?
Right. There's a few.
There's three ways to do accounts receivable and past due accounts because there's three different people in the AR department. And they all have their own sequence of how they do outreach, their own template for how they turn the thumb screws, their own way that they deem something being sort of, at a point that requires action, for example. But my question to you is, when you think about a technology solution being implemented in a company, and I know you guys have done a lot to de-risk the implementation of growers. You've tried to make it the easiest, quickest, fastest, lowest pain type of solution you can. But what is really required for loyalty to work in the company, both from a technical perspective, but also, culturally in the way a company operates? What are the things where you look at a prospect or a customer and say, these guys are going to win and they're going to win fast because they got this type of stuff in place already, and we can help these guys win, but it's going to be a lift for them and it's going to be tough. What are some of the things you point to? The reason I'm asking this again, Stephen, is because it's a good chance for some of our listeners to look in the mirror as they think about whether it's growers or ERP or some other kind of a technology solution, to look at their own organization with clear eyes and say, this is something that as a pre-existing condition, we probably need to work on this. One, because it's good business, and two, because it's going to help us implement new additive technologies faster and more effectively.
Yeah, no, that's it. It's a great question. I think maybe the easiest way to answer it is at the end of the day, when you ask, like, what do you need to be able to make this work? And then we can talk about, what conditions need to be present to be successful. I think sometimes those are maybe different. We need transaction data at growers in order to make a loyalty program work, because at the end of the day, that's the data layer that we're spending most of our time, ingesting and analyzing and using for the calculations of all of these different, loyalty program economics. How we get that transaction data, varies a lot of times depending on the organization. And like you said, there may be sophistication or aptitude on how they manage their accounting or ERP systems. And it is a wide spectrum, a very wide spectrum on how I would say good hygiene is inside those programs. Fortunately, we've done enough work with a lot of the main providers of the accounting solutions inside the retail and co-op space where we've got integrations in some way or another where we can more easily connect to that transactional data. And we're capturing it, sometimes multiple times a day, oftentimes at least every single day, so that the information's, relatively up to date or what we call near real time for the farmer customers. The real challenge has been on our part because, and you talk about how does an organization evaluate maybe if they're at the right spot for this? And it's a difficult thing because I think everybody would acknowledge that there are challenges with, how they do accounts receivable and how they enter invoices and bookings and prepay and how much manual processes versus, automated exists. There's always going to be work to done there. I haven't met anybody that's like, yep, we've got this whole thing figured out. It's perfect. And we don't want to change anything. That just doesn't happen. And so everybody's on a journey and we're going to be on that journey probably forever as things continue to change of, ultimately creating a better environment on how we manage or how they manage internal processes. Again, we decided early on that if we were going to scale this technology quickly, the onus was going to be on us to find ways to adapt to the different data environments that we connect with and the varying degrees of data quality, completeness, and data hygiene. So a lot of the work. It's the not sexy work, and it doesn't make it in the press releases or on the website, but it's in all of the data ingestion and cleaning and translation and enriching and standardizing just to get data from an ERP into a format that you can accurately and confidently calculate loyalty points on. So we try to take as much of that burden as we possibly can from our customers, and that's helping a lot. The other thing that I'll say that has been like an interesting artifact of going through this process with some of our customers is that they made the decision like, hey, we're going to do this. And then it helped them kind of reflect internally on, hey, there is a new compelling reason why that we need to pay more attention to tracking this or that. Or
Yes.
we need to do a better job with this process because it's connected to this step in the loyalty program process that's important for us. And so inadvertently, we've seen co-ops go back and really rethink some internal processes and make internal improvements. But my word of caution to your to the audience and listeners here is that there's always going to be work to be done, and nothing will ever be perfect inside your ERP. And that paralyzes a lot of people. There's always internal initiatives on, well, we need to do this or this or this first before we could take advantage of, X, Y, or Z. And you could do that into oblivion. And I think what we found is those organizations, you talk about like what the mindset, what does it take for them to be successful? The ones that are like, guys, we got to find a different way, or we got to find a way to differentiate our business to continue to grow despite all of these, headwinds that we're facing, competitive pressures, the geopolitical scene, commodity prices, you name it. There's obstacles everywhere we look at. The ones that have just made a decision that we're going to do it have done a very good job of figuring their way through it. It hasn't nearly been, I think, as painful as anybody imagined. And at the end of the day, I think everybody came out the other side in a much better spot and a lot more confident in the information that they have inside their business. Oh. And then because you asked about the training, I'll say kind of one other thing is that for a salesperson, a loyalty program is a very well-structured sales tool, because you're laying out there in black and white exactly the roadmap or the stones across the water, right? That you need every single one of your customers to just go from one stone to the next stone to the next stone, right? We refer to it as like, we need them to take one step to the right. And we're literally inside of the application that salespeople use. We're giving salespeople that roadmap saying, hey, if you're going to go talk to Joe, this is where he's at. This is what he's done, and this is what he needs to do next. And so it's a playbook of sorts built into the application that giving these salespeople the script essentially on how to just show up. And instead of saying, hey, how can I help you today? It's, hey, Joe, I wanted to talk to you about your fungicide purchases because, we've got a fungicide application that we're getting ready to schedule some runs for. I see you've got, 1,962 points in your wallet. I want to talk to you about X, Y, or Z fungicide. And by the way, why don't we use some of these points towards this fungicide purchase so we can reduce your cost per acre? Would that sound good? You're lowering the farmer's cost per acre. You're exchanging value. You're using it as a strategic sales tool. You're probably likely expanding wallet share, maybe for a customer that hadn't purchased that before. And we just lay it right out for them, right inside their application. And I think that's been really effective. The flip side of that is I will say that we have seen salespeople that have chosen not to lean in, right? I'd be lying through my teeth if I said every single salesperson in ag retail picks this up and is like, by God, loyalty programs are the greatest thing in the entire world. I can't wait to get out there. Some of them say, I don't believe it. This is gimmicky. My farmers just want the best price, whatever. And to each their own. But we tracked this in 2025. And because I think at the end of the day, a salesperson's going to want to know, like, what does this mean for me? And sure, this might be great for the organization. And conceptually, I get the idea and loyalty program. Yeah, it makes sense. I hear about it all the time. But what does it mean for me, right? Is the question that they're asking. So we tracked, what does it mean for a salesperson? At the end of the day, the salespeople that are more engaged with our application or, the retail's loyalty application are outperforming their peers by 13% on average. So they're actually being more successful, more efficient, and at the end of the day, more profitable, because a lot of these guys are, gold or are compensated on sales or net margin growth, stuff like that. They're actually seeing an impact on how to use this as a structured sales tool. And so when those things start to click, right, and you start to see your peers using this as this, strategic selling tool that it is, that is what we're starting to see drive a massive amount of adoption from the, what rightfully so, maybe were some naysayers when this technology first got rolled out.
No, I think it's a great comprehensive answer, and thanks for walking us through it. I think it highlights everything from pre-existing process opportunities, let's call them, all the way through to conviction and belief among your commercial team who's going to actually be working with this tool in front of the grower for the first time. And that's, I think, why it's really important that the leaders of these organizations and the folks in our audience are thinking critically about not just what does this application, this technology do once implemented, if it's working perfectly, but what is the total cost and effort for us to get there?
Yep.
And not necessarily as we're going to choose not to pursue innovation because it's too hard, but simply quantifying where and for how long it might be difficult. And the reason I bring this up is, we've done a number of post-merger integration planning and execution projects, and I remember very vividly a heated discussion where I and the project manager on the team became the focus of some of the ire among some of the executive team because, frankly, we had identified, again, I use this 3 different AR process problem.
Mm-hmm.
We highlighted, we said, look, we can't really integrate your process with their process because you don't have a process. You have processes. So we're now going to go into process design.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna design the one process, and yes, it delayed things, and yes, it was more meetings, and yes, it was a bit more friction than anticipated. That was a pre-existing condition. We simply had the obligation of pointing it out.
Yeah.
And so I think, as you go through implementing something like the grower solution or other technologies, expect that it's simply going to apply pressure to and then highlight where you have opportunities. And those existed, yes or yes. And now you have the benefit of knowing about them. And you can choose to prioritize which ones to work on or if you fix them or not. But
yeah, and for what benefit, right? That's the other thing that
exactly.
Human nature is we get fixated on the cost and the pain and the fear of the unknown. But there's a lot of strategies out there today in the retail and co-op environment where, how they're going to be successful in 2026 is they're going to manage costs and they're going to go try to sell more stuff, right?
Yeah.
That's the strategy. But if I said, hey, what if there was a way you could grow by 19, 20% this year, not have to go prospect for a single new customer and leverage all of the existing resources that you have and not compete on price? Right? So it's hard, but you got to frame it in like there is a cost and there might be pain, but to what end and for how long, I think is what you adequately pointed out is exactly the right way to think about it.
Yeah, that's well said, Stephen. One last thing that we perhaps could have led with this because I think it's of interest to the folks in this industry, but I think it's a nice bookend on the back end of talking about the importance of loyalty, the ways to drive loyalty through your solution, how to implement, et cetera. But loyalty in the broadest definition is not risk-free, right? Depending on the angle of vulnerability. And so programs to incentivize repeat purchases have come under scrutiny over the last couple of years. And of course, I'm talking specifically about the antitrust lawsuits against Syngenta and Corteva around their, quote, illegal loyalty programs, unquote. And if I understand correctly, they're using rebate contracts as a way to bundle purchases and drive volume through the channel. And a lot of that has been cast as it was a way to protect market share, to drive buyer behavior towards their post-patent products, kind of remove the lower cost market alternatives. So ultimately, it's an anti-competitive. They were seen as an anti-competitive structure. And so I wonder how you look at this issue in terms of a potential legal or regulatory hurdle to loyalty as a competitive advantage. And is it a threat to businesses that might use a solution like growers? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but that's the typical independent ag retailer or smaller co-op is not going to have the same deep balance sheet of a Corteva or Syngenta, which will warrant government attention. But these things do have cascading effects, and a precedent set among large organizations can trickle down and have implications. So I guess I'm just wondering how you all have looked at this and maybe what we need to know about that situation, that maybe there's a different set of facts in the field where that's less relevant to your target market.
No, I'm glad you brought it up because I do think it is worth clarifying, right? Because I think the threat that you mentioned really is more on a misunderstanding of the definition of loyalty, right? Because the situations that you referred to with the chemical companies, like the core allegation there is that they were offering payments or rebates to, distributors or retailers so long as they continued, or so long as they kept purchases of, competing products. In this case, I think it was most of the generic pesticides that were coming off patent. So as long as they kept them at a very low threshold, then they were still eligible for, rebate payments. And I know, a lot of this is still under litigation, but I think it's important to understand kind of what that was and what it wasn't, right? Because when you think about loyalty, sometimes you have to or you think about loyalty in agriculture, and especially as it talks about loyalty with manufacturers and how they think about it, you have to really bifurcate it into two buckets, because there are retailer and distributor rebate or loyalty programs, and then there are grower loyalty programs. And a lot of the litigation, in fact, most of it, is really focused on the retailer and distribution rebate payments and the thresholds that were required to be met in order to be eligible for those, and how it, was perceived that it could squash competition and artificially keep prices higher. So I think what's important for, folks to understand about what we're doing that's, altogether and entirely different than that, is that our program is a farmer first design and a farmer first reward. It's actually the farmer who receives the incentive in the form of points, which is a currency that is worth absolutely nothing unless that farmer comes back to the retailer or the organization in which it was earned. We call that a closed loop rewards model. So the fact that, the incentives that farmers are getting inside the loyalty programs are actually paid for by either the retailer, co-op, or the manufacturer, because manufacturers are heavily involved in these programs that we have. And I know we probably won't get time to talk about that today, but that's an interesting side note that manufacturers, including all of the basic manufacturers, are supporting co-op and retailer loyalty programs in this way all throughout the country with, tremendous amounts of success. Other thing about our programs is there's no exclusionary thresholds, right? We're not structuring incentives where the channel loses any benefit if they source competing products, right? That is not even a function of anything that we're doing inside of our program. So because there's no exclusion or rules around it, that makes it entirely different. And uniquely enough, right? It's the organizations that we work for, the retailers and the co-ops, that get to define their program criteria, right? We just built the technology that enables them to put their strategy into a structured technology-enabled loyalty program. And the other thing is that there's no gatekeeping that happens inside of our program. In fact, we used this opportunity with the fact that the market and specifically the manufacturers were kind of, there's angst even around the word sometimes in specific circles. And I will admit, we don't hear as much about it today as we did maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago, but it's still, it still lingers. But we really went after this because we wanted to structure an environment where there truly was a win-win-win and could get the manufacturers involved. Because in the grand scheme of things, when it comes down to marketing budgets and incentive dollars, let's just face the facts, manufacturers have more dry powder than the retailer does, and they're really going after the same thing, right? We want to sell more of our products to more customers, and they have to do that through retail. So our system's really unique in that we allow our customers allow their manufacturer partners to come in and support incentives on their own products, with the notion that for every dollar that you buy, you spend or every dollar that you earn on a manufacturer incentivized product has to be spent on that manufacturer's product at that retailer. So it's actually building loyalty to the manufacturer's brand and creating a pull-through mechanism for the retailer to get that farmer to continue to come back to them, not their competitors, which is even some of the manufacturer grower rewards programs don't do that. They allow you to, earn points and go spend it wherever the heck you want, or earn dollars and go spend wherever you want. So the win-win-win here is that the retailer wins because, they built a program that in their building loyalty, they're not competing on price anymore. So they're protecting margins. and they're building, durable relationships with their customers. The manufacturer wins because they're actually investing more in a retailer's program, helping you strengthen that relationship. And really, we've seen just a lot of good work done in this whole concept of vendor alignment, manufacturers and retailers aligning themselves and aligning their strategies together. So the manufacturer can show up and support a retailer's program, knowing full well that every dollar they put into that system has got to come back to them in the form of new purchase sales. So the ROI on it is through the roof compared to a rebate. And it's a win for the farmer because at the end of the day, the farmer has the opportunity to leverage these incentives to ultimately reduce their cost per acre, and oftentimes for some of the best, most premium technology and products that are out there. So retailers getting loyalty and increased sales, manufacturers strengthening relationship with their retailer, also getting loyalty and increased sales, and the farmer is getting better service, a better experience, and a lower cost per acre for their products. And that ecosystem is one that we're super excited about because it really solves a lot of the I would say legacy incentive model challenges that have existed in agriculture.
That makes a lot of sense. And as you started off and ended with there, I mean, I think the big piece is how does the grower experience the incentive loyalty structure and this last example you provided in the form of redeemable currency within a known retailer and a reward for their business, as opposed to in what's been alleged in the lawsuits, and as you said, is still being adjudicated. What they're being rewarded with, presumably, is fewer higher priced options that are, of course, going to increase their cost per acre. So that's a helpful distinction. And it's interesting to think about how you thought through that sort of what on its face seems like a secular risk to loyalty and rewards in agriculture, and actually saying, no, there's actually something here. Let's decouple what has warranted the scrutiny from the government from what we're actually trying to do and build a model around that. So thank you for that. And Stephen, I also just want to say, thank you for taking the time to join us today. It's fun to talk to people who, of course, have niched down into something that is an underserved space within agribusiness. So that's just exciting unto itself, but also such a different angle. But your credibility, your passion, your interest, your critical thinking around it is infectious. And I appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today.
No, listen, this has been a lot of fun. I enjoyed the discussion. I could talk about this, loyalty program stuff till the cows come home. So it is something I'm passionate about, and it is something that I really believe can make a huge difference. We're already seeing it in the businesses that we work with, and we're super excited to kind of see where it goes and how it has the potential to really reshape this whole notion of what the customer experience continues to look like in agriculture. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and thanks for having me on.
You bet. And we'll make sure that for our listeners who maybe do want to continue the conversation with you, that we have links for how they can get in touch with you and with growers to learn more. And to our listeners, I appreciate you as always being a part of the Pacesetter Pod community and taking the time to listen, to consider, and then action ways to improve strategy execution, all in support of growing your agribusiness. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to having you next time right here on the Pacesetter Pod.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.